Hey friends, what time is it? It is life group time. Here we go. We are moving into week 9 of small groups, big impact. And this is a great lesson. Man, this is going to be a fun one, looking at Simon Peter and the way Jesus calls him into a life of discipleship and serving the kingdom. And that's what these groups are all about for us as well, being disciples of Jesus, studying his word, praying together, looking for opportunities to serve the kingdom together. Hey, before we get into our readings and things for this group, just be thinking about some things with your group as we're moving into closer to the holiday season, Thanksgiving, and that kind of thing. I want you to be thinking as a group about, are there opportunities maybe for serving together? One of the things that we want our groups doing is looking for mission projects, ways that we can serve the community. And that might be through, putting together one of those Samaritan's Purse boxes for Christmas, or perhaps serving at a food pantry or a place like the Boise Rescue Mission at Thanksgiving, or perhaps just thinking about your neighborhood. Maybe there's an elderly person in your neighborhood that just needs their leaves raked up or their gutters cleaned out. Maybe help putting up their Christmas lights, that kind of thing. Just be thinking about that as a group, maybe ways that you can serve in this season. Also, I want you to be thinking, because we're coming toward the end of this cycle, this sermon series that we are doing, and I want you to be thinking about a couple of those things that we did back at the beginning, the spiritual health inventory. How are you doing on those things? It might be a good time to go back and check that and just say, all right, what are the things that I'm growing? What are the things that I'm learning? Also, that handout that we had at the beginning about creating a rule of life, thinking about the spiritual formation practices, and something to be also mindful of is that in our group materials on our website, if you look at the last year's Encore journey, that whole third section about the life we live is all about spiritual formation practices. You can look at that on your own and think about some ways that God is working in your life. Let's get to our reading this week. So this is an incredible one in Luke chapter 5, where Jesus is at the Sea of Galilee. Now, in the text, it also calls it Lake Gennesaret, and that's just the Aramaic name, but it also is the Sea of Galilee. It's the same place that we read about where Jesus is doing ministry all around the sea there. And in this case now, he is going to be teaching the crowds. He first sits in a boat and teaches the crowds right there on the beach. Pretty clever idea. That's a great way to speak to a crowd, let the water and just kind of carry his voice. But then he has an interaction with Simon Peter. So let's set the stage just a bit. Our reading comes from Luke's Gospel. And as you may know, Luke is the author of this Gospel and the book of Acts. The book of Acts is the Acts of the Apostles and the early church. So in Acts, we have these incredible stories of preaching and the ministry of the apostle Simon Peter. Here he is leading the church and doing amazing things. But before there was Peter, the apostle, there was Simon the fisherman. Simon the fisherman, who probably never imagined that he was going to be part of this incredible move of the Messiah, choosing him as one of his disciples and then bringing that message of Jesus to the world. So let's see the story here. So after Jesus finishes teaching the crowds, he says to Simon, hey, let's take your boat and go out into the deep water for a catch. You'll see that on your handout there's a couple of pictures that I took when we lived in Israel and we were out hiking along the shore of the Galilee, of some of the fishing boats that still work along the shoreline there in Galilee. Usually they stay in the shallow water. And there's a reason for that. In the shallow water, there's actually some underground springs that feed into the water. So there's a lot of fish that congregate in that shallow water. And we find that right along that western shore where Capernaum and some of the towns were that Peter and the other disciples were from. But Jesus says to Simon, let's go out in the deep water and put down your nets for a catch. And, Simon must have been thinking, what's with this carpenter? Doesn't he understand? You don't fish in the middle of the day. You don't fish in the deep water. He must not know about Galilee. Okay, but Jesus, since you asked, we'll go and do it. And then amazingly, a catch of fish so great that he has to call his partners. And there's 2 boats to bring the fish in. So Simon and Andrew are there, James and John are there, some of that inner circle of disciples, and they all witness this incredible miracle. Now let's think something here about this story, because after this, Peter says something incredible to Jesus. He says, "Go away from me, Lord, for I am a sinful man." Something had happened in this exchange where Peter becomes aware, first of all, of Jesus' holiness and his own sinfulness, and he feels less than. He feels unqualified to even be in the same boat, much less to be a follower of Jesus. In the first century world, and we know that along the shore of Galilee, Capernaum, Tiberias, there was a lot of major synagogues. So while Jerusalem was the place where the temple was, and that's where the priests did their job, the Pharisees and the rabbis actually had their base in Galilee. It was sort of like the Ivy League of the rabbinic schools. Some of the best known rabbis of the first century would be teaching in the synagogues. Now, if you were growing up in that area, it might be that you would want to be part of one of the disciples of one of those great rabbis. So here's what would happen. At 5 years old, you would go to synagogue school and you'd start memorizing the first 5 books of the Torah: Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, Deuteronomy. But since you wouldn't have a copy of the Bible at home, it was at the synagogue, you'd memorize those things. By the age of 12, if you'd done a great job memorizing, you could advance to the next level. You could go to the Beit HaSefer, and now you would be studying the prophets and the other writings of Scripture. By the age of about 15, if you were really doing a good job, you could go to a rabbi and say, "I want to follow you." The rabbi would probably reply and say, "Well, tell me what you know. Tell me about your studies. Tell me what kind of grades you're getting in school." And then the rabbi would decide if you were worthy to follow them. Could you be one of their disciples? That's how the process usually worked. If you weren't quite good enough, then you would go and learn a trade. You would become a builder. You would become a fisherman. So when we come across Simon Peter and we see that he's a fisherman, we know something about him. He's probably not the best student. He might be the guy that got C's. He might be the guy that had trouble memorizing Scripture and probably thought, "Oh, I will never be a great teacher of Torah. I will never be a great disciple of one of the big rabbis that are well known." Then Jesus comes along, who at this point is getting quite a reputation. And he comes to Peter and says, "Can I teach from your boat?" And then the miraculous catch of fish, to which Peter says, "Whoa, I'm not worthy." But Jesus looks at him and says, "Peter, I tell you from now on, you're going to be catching people instead of fish." And it says at that moment, this group of fishermen left everything to follow Jesus. Look at how the roles have been reversed. Usually the great rabbi says, "You can come and apply to be one of my students, and I'll let you know if you're good enough." Jesus goes to them, reaches out to them and says, "I want you to come and follow me. I believe in you, that you can become not only a disciple of mine, but you'll be bringing people into the kingdom by your ministry, and I'm inviting you to be part of my group." Wow. Talk about a life-changing event. And that's why this group of fishermen left everything, because this is a once-in-a-lifetime offer. You don't expect the greatest rabbi in the area to come up and say, "Hey, I want you guys to be on my team." But that's what Jesus still does for us. It's not about our past. It's not about how great we are or our learning of Scripture or the degrees we have. It's simply about a willingness to say, "Jesus, whatever I have, I'm willing to put it in your hands and to serve you and to be bringing that message and catching people." What an incredible offer. And so Simon the fisherman becomes Peter the apostle and has made a huge difference in the church. As you're reading those scriptures in your group, be thinking about, what is Jesus calling you to in these passages? God be with you as you read these verses in your group.